The sun was sinking low over the mountains, painting the sky an amber fire when a frail little girl named Alara bent down at the river's edge. Her hair, tangled with dust, glowed faintly in the fading light. She was no stranger to hardship. Her hands were rough with labor far too heavy for her small frame, and her eyes, though young, carried the weary look of someone who had learned to survive without asking for mercy. That evening, while searching for clean water, she noticed something unusual on the other side of the stream. A child no older than herself limped painfully through the rocks, his clothing torn, his face streaked with mud and tears. His dark eyes widened in both fear and exhaustion when they met hers. For a moment, neither moved. The rushing water between them whispered like a warning. Alara's heart throbbed with hesitation. She knew enough about the world to understand danger this boy was not from her people. His clothing, his features, and the faint traces of paint on his skin told her what the stories in her village always warned about. Children of the forest. Children who belonged to tribes that did not welcome strangers. But her heart refused to harden. She saw how the boy clutched his ankle, trembling, unable to take another step. She did not see an enemy. She saw only a child in pain. Without another thought, she stepped into the icy water. Stones pressed sharp against her bare feet, but she pressed on, her small body straining against the current. When she reached him, the boy tried to shrink away, his breath shallow, his eyes filled with suspicion. "Don't be afraid." It was clear he didn't understand her words, but perhaps the tone pierced through. His shoulders sagged with relief. Carefully, she knelt and offered her back. Alara rose, staggering under his weight, and began the long, painful walk back across the stream. Each step felt like a trial. The cold water bit at her legs, and more than once she stumbled on slick stones. But the thought of leaving him behind never entered her mind. As they reached the far bank, Alara gasped for breath. Her knees shook, but she forced herself to keep walking. In the distance, she imagined she saw shadows moving between the trees, tall figures watching silently. But when she blinked, they were gone. She pushed the fear down. Whatever danger tomorrow might bring, tonight she had chosen compassion. She carried the limping child toward the edge of her village, unaware that this single act of mercy would ripple far beyond her understanding. She did not know that the eyes of many warriors had witnessed her kindness, and that the debt she had unknowingly earned would bring 40 of them to her door the very next day. The night after the river crossing felt longer than any night the little girl had ever known. With the limping child safe beside her, she curled up against the rough wooden wall of their tiny hut, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. Every creak and rustle made her heart race. She wondered if the group they had seen at the river would come searching. The boy, though weak and feverish, clutched her hand as if he feared she might disappear. His pain was deep. She whispered small promises in the dark, telling him he was safe, that tomorrow would be better, even though she herself did not fully believe it. Morning came with the sound of birdsong and the soft glow of sunlight piercing through the cracks in the walls. The girl rose quietly, tending to the boy's wounded leg with strips of cloth torn from her own dress. She remembered her mother's gentle hands once doing the same for her when she had fallen. The memory burned in her chest, but it also gave her courage. She fetched water from the stream, cooked what little food she had, and offered it to him first, hungry as she was. His smile, faint and fragile, was worth the sacrifice. But just as peace began to settle, the earth seemed to tremble. From the distance came the sound of hoofbeats, steady and thunderous. The girl froze, her breath caught in her throat. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the bright sun, and what she saw turned her veins to ice. A line of mounted warriors stretched across the valley, their silhouettes sharp against the morning light. One after another, they approached, strong and silent, their faces carved with purpose. Not 10, not 20, but 40 warriors, armed and watchful, drawing nearer to her humble home. The girl's knees weakened, but she did not run. Had she done right by helping him, or had she invited a storm too powerful to survive? The leader dismounted, his eyes steady and unreadable. For a heartbeat, the world held still. And then, with a voice deep as the earth itself, he spoke words that would change her life forever. The girl staggered forward, her bare feet sinking into the cold stones as she clutched the younger child to her back. Every step burned her muscles, but her will was stronger than her weakness. She whispered under her breath, half to herself, half to the child she carried, "Hold on. Just a little longer." The boy's arms tightened faintly, his face buried in her shoulder. Behind them, the forest whispered with the voices of hidden watchers. She could feel it, the weight of eyes pressing on her back. When she finally looked up, her breath froze. Across the river, in the fading light, a line of warriors stood. Their figures rose like shadows out of the mist, their chests painted, their eyes steady and unreadable. 40 men, unmoving, waiting. For a moment, fear threatened to crush her chest. She was just a poor, tiny girl, worn from hunger and hardship, yet she stood between those warriors and the frail child clinging to her. Her heart pounded, but she did not stop. She forced her feet to keep moving, the river splashing around her knees as she reached the far bank. Silence thickened the air. Not a bird sang, not a leaf stirred. The men neither stepped forward nor turned away. They simply watched as she lifted the boy higher on her back and stepped onto the rocky shore. She met it, trembling but unyielding, her eyes bright with a fire she herself did not fully understand. And then something strange happened. The faintest nod passed among the men, a silent exchange she could not read. They made no move to harm her. The girl hesitated, her throat dry. Was this mercy a test? She swallowed hard and took one careful step forward. She straightened her back, summoning every shred of courage left inside her. Whatever lay ahead, she would not falter. Little did she know, this single act of defiance, this small child's bravery in the face of 40 warriors, was the spark that would change everything. The next day, when the knock came at her door, it would not be the sound of danger she heard, but the beginning of a story greater than she could imagine. The sun had already dipped low behind the pine trees when little Alara carried the limping boy across the shallow stream, her bare feet scraped by stones, her arms trembling under his weight, yet her spirit burning with a strange courage she never knew she had. The boy, whose name she learned was Ayin, clung to her shoulders, whispering in broken words of pain that he could not walk alone. Alara had no family left. The fire that destroyed her cabin had taken her parents, and the village had turned its back on the little orphan girl. Yet when she saw this boy, alone and injured in the woods, something in her heart refused to leave him behind. She carried him to the other side, where the forest thickened and shadows seemed alive, and there she searched desperately for wild herbs she had seen her mother use once upon a time. With trembling hands she chewed the leaves and pressed them onto his wound, binding it with strips torn from her own dress. Ayin watched her with wide, dark eyes, as if he could not understand why a stranger would help him. Alara only whispered, "Because no one helped me, and I know how it feels." The boy's breathing slowed, his face softening with a fragile trust, and Alara felt a surge of strength in her tiny frame. That night, under the whispering canopy of trees, she gathered dry twigs and sparked a small fire, shielding the boy with her own body against the chill. She had nothing, yet she gave everything she could, half of her berries, her last sip of water, and all the warmth of her heart. The forest around them echoed with distant cries, perhaps wolves, perhaps something else. But Alara sat upright, watching the dark with fierce, sleepless eyes. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, as though they, too, bore witness to this unlikely bond. She knew the dawn would bring questions. Who was this boy? And would his people be kind or cruel? Still, she did not regret her choice. For the first time in a long while, she felt less alone. And far away, beyond the ridges of the mountain, drums beat faintly, carrying news through the night. The river's current pressed against the girl's thin legs, but she pushed forward, her jaw tight, her arms wrapped firmly around the smaller child on her back. Each step sent sharp stones into her feet, yet she refused to cry out. Behind her, the silent line of warriors stood watching, their eyes steady, their expressions impossible to read. She did not know if they waited in judgment, or in patience, or perhaps in quiet respect, but she would not falter. The boy on her back trembled slightly, his breath warm against her neck, his arms clinging as though she were his only anchor in a world that threatened to sweep them both away. By the time she stumbled onto the far shore, her knees were scraped, her dress soaked and heavy. Still, she held her chin high. staring back at the warriors as though daring them to speak. The silence was almost unbearable. She wanted to scream at them, to ask why they had left a child limping alone, why no hand had reached out to help. At last, one of the men stepped forward. His presence was tall, commanding, and yet there was no anger in his gaze. Instead, his brow softened as he studied the boy she carried. He spoke something in his native tongue, and a murmur passed through the line behind him. Then, without warning, he knelt down and touched the child's arm gently, as if confirming he was truly safe. The girl's heart pounded, unsure whether to recoil or trust. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them, her courage and their silent strength meeting in the open air. Then, another elder appeared from the group, a man with gray streaks in his long hair. He nodded slowly, almost respectfully, toward the girl. She did not understand his words, but she felt the meaning in his tone: acknowledgement, gratitude. The child on her back whimpered softly, tired beyond measure. She lowered him to the ground, brushing his hair from his eyes with a tenderness that only deepened the weight of the scene. She had crossed not just a river but a boundary of fear. The eyes of the warriors told her as much. Their silence was not emptiness. It was the pause before a story larger than herself began to unfold. And in that silence, she felt a chill that was not from the river water. Something was coming. Something that would test not only her strength but the meaning of the choice she had made. The sun was beginning to dip behind the tall pines when little Anna felt the river's icy grip against her bruised feet. Every step burned with effort. Every breath carried the weight of her younger companion clinging to her back. The boy, frail and limping when she had first found him, now rested silently against her shoulder, his face pressed against her tangled hair. She did not know his name, nor the village he came from, but she knew pain when she saw it. His swollen ankle, the way he winced with every step, had moved her heart in a way she couldn't ignore. The cold current rushed around her knees, splashing up against the thin cloth that clung to her small frame. But she pressed on, warriors silent, immovable, their eyes fixed on her every movement. Their presence struck fear into her chest, but she did not falter. She knew they were watching, testing, weighing her spirit against their silence. She wondered if they would take the boy from her, if they would punish her for daring to cross into their world. But the thought of leaving him behind was unbearable. The forest echoed with stillness, broken only by the sound of water swirling around her feet. For a moment, she felt the gaze of dozens pierce her very soul. They were not just men. They were guardians of something ancient, something she could not yet understand. But the child's weak arms tightened around her shoulders, reminding her of her promise to carry him to safety. She clenched her jaw, lifted her head, and pushed forward, step after grueling step, until the cold stream released her at last. When her feet touched the pebbled shore, she did not collapse, though her body begged her to. The warriors did not move, nor speak. Only their eyes followed her, unreadable, like the mountain shadows stretching long in the fading light. And then, from deep within her chest, Anna felt something she had not known before: not fear, not despair, but a quiet fire. She might have been poor, small, and fragile, but in that moment, she carried the strength of giants. And though she did not know it yet, this single act, this choice to help a limping child, was about to awaken a story far greater than her own. The river water still clung to her legs as the tiny girl carried the limping child on her back, each step heavier than the last. The weight was not just the child but the fear of what waited ahead. She could feel the gazes of the warriors lined along the riverbank, 40 silent figures, their dark eyes unreadable, their stance unshaken. She had never felt so small, yet never so determined. She thought of her mother's words, whispered long ago: strength is not in the arms, but in the heart that carries others. That thought pushed her forward. The limp of the child on her back was not just physical, it was a limp of despair, of hunger, of days without safety. She whispered promises into his ear, though she wasn't sure he heard them. We're almost there. Don't give up now. I'll keep you safe. Each whisper was as much for her as it was for him. Were they waiting to strike, or were they waiting to judge? She couldn't tell. Her heart pounded louder than the river's flow. At last, her feet touched the stones of the far bank. Her knees nearly buckled, but she tightened her grip on the child's legs. She would not fall. She would not show weakness. She lifted her chin, staring at the first warrior in the line. The girl's body trembled, but her gaze did not falter. In that fragile body was a storm of courage. And then it happened, a single step. One of the warriors moved forward, his moccasins crunching on the rocks. The rest remained still, yet that single step made the girl's breath catch. She braced herself, her tiny frame quivering. The child on her back stirred, clinging tighter. The warrior's shadow fell across her, and for a heartbeat she wondered if this was the end. But deep inside, something told her otherwise. She had crossed the river not to surrender, but to prove her heart. She had carried not just a child but a promise of humanity. And whether they accepted her or not, she knew one truth: she had already won the battle of fear. The river still echoed in her ears, its cold bite lingering on her skin as the tiny girl finally reached the opposite bank with the limping child clinging to her back. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but her spirit did not allow her to falter. She lowered the child gently onto a flat stone and brushed his damp hair from his face. He whispered words in his tongue she could not understand, but his meaning was clear. He trusted her now. With every breath he had left, the girl sat beside him, drawing in deep gulps of air. The warriors had not advanced, nor had they turned away. They remained as still as the pines behind them, their silence heavier than the mountain air. A shiver ran down her spine, but she clenched her fists in determination. If they came for her, she would face them. If they judged her for helping their child, she would bear it proudly. For she knew, deep in her heart, that mercy is stronger than fear. As the sun dipped lower, painting the trees in amber and gold, she wrapped her arms protectively around the little boy and whispered promises she was not sure she could keep. That night, beneath the pale light of the moon, she closed her eyes knowing tomorrow would bring consequences. But in her chest burned the courage of someone far older than her years, a fire no river could wash away.